Hello, everyone, and welcome back to This Day in History, our nightly look back at a specific day in history, where we take a look back at the events of a day, the historic context in which they took place, and the historic ramifications of those events, and some people that were born and some people that died on that day. As always, if you have not yet, please hit the subscribe button, the bell notification icon to be alerted anytime I post new content, and tell a friend. And without any further ado, this day in history, May the 19th. And on this day, in 2015, in Mount Pleasant, New York, which is in Westchester County, in the Pontico Hills village of Mount Pleasant, Happy Rockefeller died at the age of 88. From May of 1963 until December of 1973, she served as the First Lady of the state of New York, while her husband, Nelson Rockefeller, was governor. And from December of 1974 until January of 1977, she served as the Second Lady of the United States after her husband, Nelson Rockefeller, was appointed and confirmed as Vice President of the United States. Mrs. Rockefeller and the Vice President married in 1963. He was 18 years her senior. She had previously been married to James Slater Murphy, a virologist associated with the Rockefeller Institute and a close friend of Nelson Rockefeller. They had 4 children together. Her husband, Dr. Murphy, and her divorced on April the 1st, 1963, for reasons the New York Times called grievous mental anguish, and her former husband lawyer classified as irreconcilable differences. 1 month later, on May the 4th, 1963, at the home of Lawrence S. Rockefeller in Mount Pleasant, Happy married the governor, who had taken office in 1959. She had worked as a member of his office staff until her resignation in 1961. Governor Rockefeller divorced his first wife, Mary Todd Hunter Clark, on March the 16th, 1962. Happy and Nelson Rockefeller had 2 sons together, Nelson Jr., born 1964, and Mark, born 1967. To say that the relationship at the time was controversial would be an understatement. British journalist Lady Carol Jane Campbell wrote in the London Evening Standard, when the Murphy all came known. Already, people are comparing Happy Murphy to the Duchess of Windsor when she was playing Mrs. Simpson. More damaging still was the political fallout. At the time, Rockefeller was pursuing the presidential nomination of the Republican Party in 1964. And it, in some respects, probably cost Rockefeller the nomination. The rapidity of it all, he gets a divorce, she gets a divorce, and the indication of the breakup of two homes. Our country doesn't like broken homes. Wow, how the political times have changed. But despite some people's disapproval, Nelson Rockefeller's political career was not totally over. He served and was reelected twice more as governor and was appointed vice president by Gerald Ford and served until the end of the Ford administration. There has been speculation that Mrs. Rockefeller and Mr. Rockefeller had a third child. There is speculation that one of her children that is attributed to Dr. Murphy was actually Nelson's daughter. And some Rockefeller intimates say that it was an open secret of who her real parentage was. Governor Rockefeller, Vice President Rockefeller, whichever term you prefer, would die in 1979 in his office in Rockefeller Center in a very compromising state. He was involved in some extracurricular activity. And he was at the age of 70. Mrs. Rockefeller would go on to live a long life after his death as a widow. And as I said, would die in 2015 at the age of 88 following a short illness. One thing we should note about Mrs. Rockefeller is she was a breast cancer survivor. She underwent a double mastectomy in 1974, 2 weeks after the First Lady Betty Ford underwent a single mastectomy. So her and Betty Ford had that common bond of being breast cancer survivors. Some things to note about Mrs. Rockefeller and her husband. Nelson Rockefeller was a liberal Republican. He was if you've ever heard the term Rockefeller Republican, Nelson Rockefeller embodied it. It was a East Coast brand of republicanism that really fell out of favor amongst Republicans after the nomination of Barry Goldwater in 1964. It had vestiges after Goldwater's massive defeat, but really the death blow to that form of republicanism came in 1980 with the election of Ronald Reagan to the presidency. Who were some prominent Rockefeller Republicans besides Nelson Rockefeller? Jacob Javits would be one. He was a senator from New York. Prescott Bush, who was a senator from the state of Connecticut, and the grandfather of a future president, George W. Bush, and the father of George Herbert Walker Bush, who served as president as well. There are some, myself included, who would put George H.W. Bush in some iterations in his career in the category of a Rockefeller Republican. His views certainly were shift. He dissembled a lot. He this would require a whole nother video for a whole nother topic. But just needless to say, in earlier iterations of his career, George H.W. Bush was very supportive of reproductive rights and Planned Parenthood. His nickname was Rubbers. And I'm just going to leave it at that. The things that set Rockefeller republicanism away from what you would today classify as general Republican ideology is really on the social issues. They were very liberal on social issues, more of a live and let live version of conservatism. But they were economically conservative. They supported those type of measures. But as I said, that really fell out of favor with the Barry Goldwater getting the nomination. In 1964 was the first kind of death blow to Rockefeller republicanism, and its ultimate demise came with the election of Reagan. It is used now. Rockefeller republicanism is a derogatory term within inside the Republican Party. You may often hear it classified under the term country club republicanism. If you hear someone describing a fellow Republican as a country club Republican, it's not a term of endearment. I, for one, would like to see a reemergence of Rockefellerism inside the Republican Party, or country club republicanism inside the Republican Party. I think that both parties are, you're seeing a lot of extremism in both parties, and we need to really see more moderate forces take hold again inside the two parties. Voices of reason and sanity, and hopefully after this election that we have in November, we can get back to that. I will see you all tomorrow. Have a great day and a good night.